So let me ask you a question. I entitled this video Elephant in the Room because right now I feel like every comic book that you could possibly want, if you're a comic book collector, is available. And that kind of scares me. What are you seeing so far? We'll touch base on where I'm seeing these books, but from like a broad perspective, as we start talking about this, what is your feeling towards what I just said?
You know, it's kind of an interesting thing and something that like, so I'll do a lot of dealer interviews and talk to dealers, from time to time at like the San Diego's and other cons and stuff. And I know you did one in New York, which was great. And people's perspectives, from what I gather, is a lot of dealers will say things like, oh, like, you don't see these books every day, or hey, these things are, it's hard to find these things, and all this stuff. But as someone who does, YouTube, and I'm sure you have this experience, and we're online and we're watching like heritage auction sales and maybe report on this, and then we're on Instagram consignment pages and we're very well aware of Whatnot and, short box apps and things like that. I feel like I see everything all the time, always. And so it's kind of an interesting thing where I genuinely feel like there's been such an explosion of the comic book ecosystem within like the last 4 years, like ever since COVID, not just from like attention going to comic books, but think of all like the companies and like sales platforms and stuff that have popped up over the last couple of years. And with that has come, well, like availability of inventory and people's books that were maybe hidden away in their basement that they didn't have access to sell. All of a sudden they have that venue to do so. And it's kind of like brought that census, like literally, a URL away, for wherever you are looking online. So it's really an interesting thing to think about. And you sort of wonder, like, yeah, are we in a place where like prices are going down because the market hasn't equalized because there's so much available stock and inventory that, like people just can't absorb it all. And before that, there was like a place where, because the channels weren't as prevalent, like there were not as many places to buy it. Like you would be lucky if your LCS had a giant size X-Men #1, And so in a weird way, like, it's like, the exposure of the sales platforms have kind of just made things seem so common. And I don't know if that's a distorted view or if that's just the reality of the comic world we live in these days. But yeah, that's kind of my first initial thought as you kind of float that out. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, and I remember getting back into comics, like I probably got in maybe a little bit before everybody else started jumping back in around 2017 or so. And I started going to like these local shows they have once a month by me. And I was getting crazy deals on even minor keys, some of the bigger keys. But like when I went to those shows, there would be a few guys who had like some big books and everything else would kind of be filler. Now, you talked about COVID and 2020, how everything kind of came to light and everything became available. Even during that time, I wasn't seeing, like you said, a giant size X-Men on every platform there was. And back then it was, let's talk pre-Instagram. I mean, what do we have? We had eBay. We have the auction houses, which to me, I really wasn't using any of them back then, outside of Comic Link, which I've used since the early 2000s. Maybe if like a bigger dealer had a website, you'd find their website and search through some of the books. I had local shows. You had the bigger cons, of course, still going on, New York Comic Con, San Diego, stuff like that. But now the explosion of where everybody and their grandmother is a comic book dealer, even if it's just a simple collector like you and me, we're all selling comics. So I feel like I could go anywhere and find an FF #5. I can go anywhere and find an AF-15. And I want to get into Instagram a little bit, maybe not right this second, but literally over the past month and a half, every Instagram consignment page that does it for money, like that does it as a business, there had to be at least 25 or so Amazing Fantasy 15s over the past month and a half that I saw come up for sale and then sell, not just sit there. So I'm kind of nervous. I'm not gonna lie to you. Do you think that, yes, we do have these new avenues to go ahead and buy books, but do you think the flooding to the market, all these books right now, is going to be detrimental now and in the future?
I don't think it's going to be like detrimental, but I do think that there was a time when the pond was just a lot smaller, and I think that there were a lot of sellers who were able to do very well and were able to kind of like be the medium between, the person who didn't know what to do with their collection, and they would just go to the dealer and sell it to them. And then that dealer would facilitate it over to, whoever the eventual collector would be. But now it's sort of like, because of Whatnot, because of Facebook groups, which not to say that Facebook groups didn't always exist. It's just that I think COVID, accelerated everyone's like onlineness, so now everybody was joining these groups, and I'm sure that the numbers have exploded for, these types of social circles. So it's like, you just kind of can be your own, what do you call it? Like part-time seller, and, you can sell your own comic book collection, and it's not that difficult to do so. So I think that the competition has just become a lot more fierce. And at the same time, that's kind of caused, I guess you would say, like a lot of like volatility in the prices and stuff, because it's like you said, it's like all of a sudden there's like 20 AF-15s, on this Instagram page. And it's like, what is going on here? And you can see the numbers on, the CGC census and things like that. So, there's whatever it is, 3,000 copies that exist, but I swear 2,999 have been sold, in the last month. So it's pretty crazy to see that. But that being said, though, like you said, people are still buying it. So is it detrimental to, the hobby as a whole? Like maybe, I don't know if I would go that far, but at the same time, like it makes it harder to be a dealer or a comic seller or an LCS, I guess, at this point.
So that brings me to so we're seeing all these books flying around Instagram. I'm seeing all these things sell. Do you think it hurts? I don't want to say the value of the book, because they are selling, and I do think prices are pretty solid, at least for that book, AF-15. But what I'm feeling is that, if I'm seeing all these books come up for sale, it doesn't make me want to buy it. So do you think it hurts the market that way, with other collectors are saying, well, I don't really need to go out and buy this book right now because I'm seeing them being flooded with the market. I can get them at any time. And that doesn't have to be AF-15. It could be smaller keys as well. But like, if AF-15 can be had at any moment, what about the smaller keys? Are people saying the same thing? I don't need to go out and get this right now. So it's just stopping people from buying is my question.
It's funny. What you expressed, I feel exactly the same way. But I wonder if we're not a good, temperature check for that, because I think we have YouTube channels and we're constantly looking and we're following those Instagram pages. And I feel like the majority of people don't,
that's a good point.
Who are interested in buying it. So, but I would say this though, I think most people who are watching our conversation now might relate to how we feel. Cause I feel like if you're watching this, like you're pretty hardcore, you're in it. Like if you're watching any YouTube content, or if you consume any type of collecting content, I think that you're an above average involved collector. That's just my opinion. But I will agree with you that, I make a joke with, a couple other people, how like every single auction that comes around, there's like always a Superman one now, and there's always a Batman one. And it's crazy to me because it's like, they're not that common, but like it certainly feels like it is. And yeah, there is something to the fact that it sort of takes away a little bit of the mystique of the book itself, because you see it come up, or that, okay, I didn't get this one, but I know in 3 months' time at the next signature auction, there's going to be another one, and so that is kind of, I don't know what the right word for that is. Like, is it concerning? No, it does it sort of take away maybe the surprise and delight, maybe a little bit, for me. And I don't know, I've never made a video about this sort of topic, but I've always wanted to touch on this. I just haven't been able to think of like, the best way to talk about it. But there is something to this idea of when you get a book that you've been going for, even if it's not necessarily like as high a grade as say you would ideally want, but once you sort of get it, like, it's like, okay, like the mystique of that book is sort of lost, at least that happens to me. And then all of a sudden it's like, like I don't really need a higher grade. I kind of have this one, and that's fine. So I share that because it kind of goes back to your point of like, when you sort of see the books come up all the time, it sort of dispels that myth a little bit. But again, maybe we're just a different kind of animal with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, people who are watching this on the rewind, or we're taping this so everybody knows, so it's going to air at some point. But if you're watching this right now, we want to hear from you what you think. Do you think how we're thinking right now, or do you kind of lean towards the other aspect of it? But you just touched on something that I was going to bring up, and that's heritage signature auctions, because the last signature auction, and I did cover it on my CBC News spoof that I do, that there were 3 Superman ones in that auction, whether they were incomplete, complete, restored, whatever it is. There were 2 Batman ones. So you said it, the mystique of these books are kind of dwindling a little bit. If you go on the census, and I do this consistently, there's roughly 300 Batman ones. Superman ones, I think there's like 100 and change. Detective Comics 27, there's under 100, and obviously Action ones, there's under 100. Right now, there were 3 Action ones available at New York Comic Con, whether that were going to be coming up for auction or they're just a private sale. 3 for sale. I couldn't remember the last time I saw 3 Action ones for sale. As it stands right now, Heritage has 2 Detective Comics number 27s for sale on their auction that'll be ending in, I think, 7 or 8 days. One restored, and one was at 0.5, garage sale fine that they had. I believe there's one Superman 1, and there's one Batman 1, and there also is an Action 1 in the same auction. Now, I've said this multiple times on my shows and to other people, is that what is the benefit of putting all those books in the same auction? I would think that the people who have the type of money to spend in these books, they're not buying multiple, but maybe I'm wrong. But doesn't that hurt, like you said, the mystique of owning those books, but also the value of those books, in this type of market where kind of everything is fragile and everything is available?
I mean, I think it does. Like, if I had an Action 1 and then there was 2 others in the same auction, I probably wouldn't want to sell mine in that auction. I would think that the, heritage auctions, like, they're going to win no matter what, in a way. So, like, they probably are like, yeah, more. So I think for them, it's a win. But yeah, if you're somebody who owns that book, it's probably not. But then let me ask you this. Do you think that we're still feeling the effects of, like, all these people who, maybe got in a little over their head and bought into a lot of these books, and they got to, like, get out of this stuff? And we're sort of like, seeing the person who it's like, I shouldn't have probably bought that Batman 1. I should probably sell it. And, like, they got to let it $1 start get out of it. They can't sit it on eBay and just wait for the right person to come along. So do you think we're feeling a little bit of that effect?
It's funny you say that, because we've seen the demise of, I don't want to say copper, because copper seems to be the only thing that's really hot right now for some reason with all the copies out there. But Silver Age, we've seen how things have pulled in. We've seen how things have pulled in from the Bronze Age as well. Like, they've really come down up to 70% in some of these books. Like Fantastic 448 has gotten the biggest crush that I've seen. But, like, the Golden Age was going while Silver Age was coming down. Like, Golden Age was pushing higher. People were going out and buying these Golden Age books. And just like you said now, are those people just saying, you know what, I bought this kind of thinking that Silver Age was going down. I'm buying into something that maybe there's not a lot of, or at least I don't think there's a lot of. And now they have buyer's remorse and they just need to unload. I don't know. My whole thought process of this was that I didn't really think of that, of people wanting to unload. I thought, you know what, are people like retirees selling their books, and now all of a sudden we're seeing all these bigger books come to market? I don't have an answer of why all of a sudden. I just found it incredibly strange that all of a sudden, a year and a half ago, we have a big Silver Age drop off, and now we're starting to see it in the Golden Age. Now, prices haven't come down like they have in the Silver Age. That last signature auction on Heritage, we had some really good sales and some kind of not so great sales. So it was kind of like a mixed bag. I'm kind of anxious to see what this next one, what these books are going to sell for, but I don't know where their books are coming from. What's your thought? You just think it's people who kind of bought in at kind of the wrong time, but we'd have to go back and see, like, the barcode, the numbers. I'm losing my mind right now. The serial numbers. That's the certain numbers to see which books sold. And if, previously, if they were private sales, I don't think we're going to get that information, but I never thought of, maybe they are people just trying to unload, but I kind of feel like it's something else. Like, people feel like they're desperate right now and they're just letting go of everything.
I think it's probably a mixed bag. I mean, anecdotally, like, there have been times where it's like, I've seen like a Captain America 1, like the same book, like sell twice in whatever 6 months. So it's like, okay, clearly something happened there. Like maybe someone overspent or whatever, and they got to get out of that book. So I'm sure that does happen. Is it the majority of cases? I mean, yeah, like you said, we'd have to like really do a deep dive and like figure that out. It could be that, you know, if you're somebody who's had that book for, you know, 20, 30 years or whatever, I mean, now was as good a time in the last 4 years to have sold it as any. So it could just be people are finally capitalizing on the hype of it. The other part of it is too, is I wonder this, like, what percent of like heritage auction buyers or like comic link buyers or whatever, like what percent of them do you think are like pure collectors? And then like what percent are dealers? Because I think what happens is a lot of these books get like absorbed by a big dealer because they're just like, you know, like you're going to buy anything if it's a good deal. You know, so like, especially if you're somebody who's like willing to, you know, sit on it and flip it or whatever. So I feel like a lot of these books probably fall into the hands of dealers in a lot of ways. And I know that like, I've seen it, like, I'm sure you've seen it too. It's like, you'll see something go on Heritage and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here it is on the consignment page at like a 10% markup, you know? So like, I think a lot of dealers get it. And then maybe like they try to go for the quick flip and they're like, like it didn't work and whatever. Let me just roll the dice again and let it go so I can free up capital to go onto the next thing. So I think that probably happens a decent amount, but yeah, but I don't know. It's probably a mixture of everything really.
So it's funny you said that because I was going to mention something along those lines. I got a letter from Heritage, believe it or not, basically asking me if I had books that I wanted to consign or outright sell, which I thought was interesting. And I actually ended up giving them a call, and basically I got on the phone with a rep and we had a conversation about, you know, certain books that I have in my collection that if I were to try to sell, what they would offer. So it made me think like, you know what, along the same lines, what if they're buying the books themselves? What if they're saying to themselves, you know what, some of these books are not really going for what we think that they should be going. Why don't we place a bid and hold on to the book with the hopes that later on that we can make a profit from those books? So you're right. We don't know where these books are going to once they sell. If they're, like you said, some of them just appear right back up for sale after they sell. So it's definitely possible that they are being backdoored, is not the right word, but they're being held on to by Heritage or other auction houses. But dealers are another thing, right? I guess if a dealer has that type of capital to kind of throw around, especially like in a Batman 1, a blue label that sells for like over 100K, I don't think I know me as a collector, I couldn't just roll the dice and say, here, take my Batman 1, throw it up in auction. I can't take the $30,000 loss. To me, that would be insane.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it'd be insane too, but I do think that there are some dealers that play with those types of margins for sure.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I mean, you know, this is all obviously speculation, but if I was a very successful auction house that knew that I have to quarterly do massive comic auctions, well, I better bring some heat. So like, you know, I better have a vault ready of stuff that I can pull out and like, you know, put on the cover of the catalog that quarter. So like, and I don't think necessarily there's anything purely wrong with that. Like if you think of Heritage Auctions as just like any other dealer, you know, like they're allowed, it doesn't have to be all consignment. They're allowed to buy and sell their own inventory. But it you know, it does make you sort of wonder like, I mean, are these auction houses like trading with each other? You know, like, is that what's going on here? I mean, that's a whole other, you know, tinfoil hat area, but you know, that's kind of the wild world of, you know, collectibles, you know, it's very opaque. So we don't know what's going on with those types of things, but it's possible that, the auction houses have their own inventory. You know, maybe they have 10 Batman ones, you know, just in stock that they just sit on. And, you know, if they don't get a consignment of one, they'll sell one that they already have because you got to have the inventory to get the clients. So, yeah.
So just to give everybody out there a little bit of a, you know, a note, there are 76, I think, off the top of my head, Detective Comics 27s on the CGC census. Okay. 2 of them are for sale right now in the same auction. I know of a third one that actually sold privately. So do the math. Under over 3%, roughly 5%, whatever it is, of a very scarce comic just sold within or going to sell within the next month. That to me is just wild. That those big time comics, a character who has, taken over pop culture, who's a mainstay, not only in comics, but in the world, his first appearance wildly sold within 1 month. So it gives me pause. And I want to shift gears for a second and mention that right now, like I said before, we saw the Silver Age books really kind of fall. We're seeing the Golden Age be kind of pushed out at a rapid pace, which is scary, especially for me. But do you think it has anything to do with the economy, how interest rates are still high? They could take money out of books, put it into, certain funds and get 5% a month out of it. 5% out of $100,000 is $5,000 at the end of the year. People who buy these books have millions and millions of dollars,
Yeah.
So do you think that has anything to do with it? Why we're seeing so much, people selling at the moment, especially Golden Age?
I think so. I mean, I know people don't always like to get into the weeds with the financial aspect of comic books and stuff, but at the same time, since we're having the conversation and you're talking about that type of book, I mean, yeah, these people who have that type of money are like, hey, do I want to spend it on this, or do I want to spend it on, like you said, this interest-bearing savings account, and in most cases, it's going to be safer and wiser to do the latter. So they have to really want to get it. And I think that was happening for the time. And I think now that the economy is where it's at, people are less willing to just, YOLO into those types of items. But chances are, there will be a time again when people get all risk on again, and they're sort of like when you can't just leave your money in the bank and get 5% or whatever anymore. Yeah. There's going to be a time when that happens. And when that happens, then people are going to be buying up a lot of stuff again. And maybe that will eventually make its way over to comic books. That would be my guess.
That's my thinking as well. That, I mean, that's how my mentality is. If you don't know, if you're just watching my channel right now, I've sold off a lot of books. I basically have what's in my collection that I want to keep basically for the long term. And that was my process. I don't need this. I don't need that. I'd rather have the cash right now to put to work, whether it be in the market, or whether it be in an interest bearing money market account, something like that, because I thought that I was getting a better return than what I'm getting on some of my comics that are not, to me, something that I don't need for the long term. So that was my inkling, and I really wanted your answers to that question. But do you think that there are people out there who think that a recession is impending? Do you think that is part to do with why people are selling books still at a rapid pace?
I mean, I think so. Right? That seems like that's the case. I mean, I haven't really done a deep dive in this, and maybe this would have been a better thing to do last year, because it probably would have been even more true. Maybe things are starting to get better, but I think you can ask any LCS owner, hey, have you? I actually did this just in my own just personal goings and stuff, not on YouTube content, but I would just occasionally ask an LCS owner, be like, hey, you guys getting more collections in these days? And 100% of them are like, oh my God, this year has been more than the last 5 years combined, And so yeah. I think a lot of people have been definitely, like you said, selling off books to reshift or whatever, whether they need it to pay their bills, or they are just sort of want to keep their gunpowder dry, so to speak, So I definitely think that's been happening.
What about you personally? I see some big books behind you there, and I don't even remember you getting a Tales of Suspense 39. I'm not going to lie, but I do remember I saw your unboxing of the Captain America, which is a huge book. Congratulations. But Thanks. Now I see that's a huge book. So has your attention also shifted as the market has shifted, being a collector?
Yeah. I mean, the way that I've always sort of approached my comics is kind of been the same, at least for the last 3 or 4 years, where it's there's only a couple things that are not for sale. Everything is constantly for sale, and it's kind of like a revolving door, in my collection, at least on the expensive stuff. Obviously I have my, Darkhawk runs and things like that, nobody is not a big deal, and I'm just going to hold on to that stuff, and that's just for me to enjoy. But yeah, I kind of, we'll just hunt books and let it all kind of come my way and pick up stuff I find that makes me happy or is like a good deal. Or, if it is a book I want, like I really wanted the Captain America 3, like I definitely, it was something that like, I felt like, all right, at some point I just have to hold it. I just have to like own this. And then if somebody paid me more for it, I mean, I probably would let it go. Like, you know what I mean? And that's just kind of the nature of how I view the comics, because ultimately, we're all going to move on with our comics one day. So it's like, it's really more about like that hunt and that chase and being able to have it for a time and then, letting it go on to the next person. But yeah, I think to answer your question of like, has my mindset changed? I think I'm just like more willing. If someone makes me an offer, I just take it. I think that's kind of where I'm at with stuff. But it's not to say that I won't constantly buy and sell. It's just that it's like, or I'm less precious. I think is what I'm trying to say. Like a certain maybe prior times in my life, I would have been like, no way, I'm going to sell this thing. But if somebody sold it to me now, it's like, yeah, I'll sell it. And I know that I'm going to what we were discussing earlier in the conversation. Like, I just know that I can find it again if I have to. So that's kind of where I'm at.
That's the thing.
Is that similar to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you know this, but I traded like a year and a half ago. I traded like 13, 14 books for a Batman 1, and to me, it just made sense. Like me as a collector, I like to go through and like, I find the history of the characters that I enjoyed to be a bigger part of it than the financial aspect. Like, so having owned a lot of these Marvel Silver Age keys at one point, even before I got back in 2017 and then reacquiring them, it's just about owning a part of history to me, something that I grew up with. So then being able to do that and take into something that I didn't think I would be able to ever own a Batman 1, forget it. Like, being able to do that was like, wow, like it's just your evolution as a collector, I take it. So you go from one thing, it's like, you know what, like you said, I don't necessarily need it. If someone offered me more for it, I would do it. Same situation. Like it's like I had something that I can kind of swap for something else that I never thought I could have. So that's how my mind works as a collector and as an individual, that like if you're not moving forward, you're just kind of stuck and you kind of get, whatever. And I think a lot of collectors are like that right now, where they kind of feel stuck. And that's why I think the unloading is taking place, at least some of it. I also think it has to do with fear. And that's something I want to touch on now is there's a lot of collectors that are just crazy fear that these books are just going to keep going down and they're just unloading. But what I've seen, and you let me know if you've seen the same thing, because I know you cover a lot on market prices and stuff like that every month, is that I've seen some stabilization in Silver Age comics. People were really like just crazy selling their stuff like there was no tomorrow. I'm seeing like a little bounce here and there, then we'll come back down a little bit. There's going to be some fluctuation, but overall, that is what happens during a bottoming process. We have like a little bit of back and forth going on. Is that the same thing that you're seeing?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I do that series on my YouTube where I do like the index, and I have my ways in which I do it and stuff. And, there's certain books in there that like, I kind of mentioned this, and actually I'd be curious to hear what you think about this. Like one of the books in the index is, First High Evolutionary. And it's like, I don't know, like maybe a book like that will never, ever go back to where it should, or where it once was, and so that kind of draws down, to say the index in a little bit of a way, but then there are other books, like you said, that I actually consistently see them selling at least at this floor, if not trending upwards. So with the response to the fear thing, I think people are very fearful, or saying everything is going to go to zero. And sometimes I'll cheekily like use that as my titles and stuff like that. And it's me just being kind of facetious, because I don't actually think that that's the case. I mean, hey, one day everything's going to end. Maybe 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, I don't know. But I don't think that it's going to end in the next 15, 20 years. I don't think that that's the case. I have a hard time. Here's what I'll say. I would only be fearful if we flash forward, it's 2027, the trailer for Avengers Secret Wars drops, and Robert Downey Jr. is in it, you know, and everyone is hyped, and maybe the economy is better at that time. And, you know, you go into this movie and people watch it and it's like, you know, the greatest thing ever. Hopefully it is. I have a hard time envisioning a world where that doesn't reignite people into the comic space. If it doesn't, then okay, maybe this whole like movie hype thing was legit. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I don't know if you feel sort of the same way.
Yeah, I mean, the MCU losing its way for a little bit definitely caused some panic, and it definitely caused a lot of people who I think weren't, I don't want to use the words true collector because I think that's a little obnoxious, but people who weren't in the space before the movie started coming out. Like, I've been a collector, whether it be reading certain books or collecting things my entire life. You leave, you come back, you leave, you know, whatever. So, yeah, of course it's going to pull people back in, but it may pull the people who kind of jump ship again. I'm hoping it reignites the fire in some of the people who collect consistently, because that's what I really want to see. But as the point that you brought up about the High Evolutionary book and stuff like that, I mean, I try to drive home the point, at least on some of my videos, is that those certain books, even if they are Silver Age books like that one is, like, it's such a minor character in the overall landscape of Marvel and in comics that I think a lot of people feel like that's a throwaway, when it's not. It just really depends the price you're willing to pay for that character or the storyline for that matter. So the bigger money you're going to put towards the bigger first appearances. I've always said that. And the smaller money you could put towards the minor ones. But if you want to own the book, you should own the book regardless. Just don't overpay for it. But I think people are so freaked out right now because of the downturn, and they've probably been hurt, especially a few YouTubers I've seen who have come on and said, you know, I've taken a beating over the past couple of years, and they're really kind of mad, not only at themselves, but the whole comic collecting community. But I just hope that that's...
Well, I think there's definitely a lot of people that got burned and hurt and stuff. And I've definitely lost money on a lot of books, but like, you know, this is kind of why, at least for me, you know, it's kind of all of the comics like are just sort of a revolving door. And there's definitely ones I've lost a lot on, and there's ones that I've made money on. And ultimately the best thing is if you can, you know, be that lucky person who finds, like, you know, the whatever AF-15 at the garage sale, like, you know, that offsets all of the losses that you probably ever had on all the comics you bought. But there's definitely people that are upset about it. And it's kind of too bad because, you know, when I think of like movie spec and stuff, like, maybe it's naive of me to think of it this way, but I always just kind of thought it was fun. Like, I know, like, I think it got overdone. Like, obviously people went way too hard with it. And this is where a lot of people got burned on it and stuff, but it was always kind of fun. That was like, hey, you know, High Evolutionary, and like, oh, here's the book. And like, I kind of own that thing. And that was like, there was kind of a pure just excitement that came with that little thing, but it just got overdone. And it'd be cool to get back to that in a way that is not
I hope so. I'm with
you know, but like, yeah, it doesn't have to be so like hype, like you're going to get rich stuff. It just makes it a little exciting, in my opinion, you know, and there's a balance here with it.
People forget this is a life experience. Collecting anything is a life experience, especially when you have something to tie it to. Like, if you're a reader growing up and all of a sudden you're seeing these great characters you remember as a kid coming up on the screen, I think that's why a lot of people follow, you know, Batman, Spider-Man. Those are the two biggest characters, especially me, because those are my two favorite characters. But even just finding a book, like you said, of a character you've seen on the screen afterwards or before an announcement, like that's what it's about. It's about the experiencing. It's about the hunt. It's about tying a memory or a connection to that character or to a movie, whatever it is. And I think people forget that a lot.
Yeah. And just enjoying the story of it. Like, or being inspired, you know, seeing the character on the screen and then like wanting to dive more into that character within the comics and stuff, and have it just be like this, you know, this cycle that helps feed each other, you know. And so I think that stuff is ultimately fun, but like all things, you know, or this is why we can't have nice things, is like, you know, it gets a little too crazy at times.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because most collectors, like, I'm 47 years old, so I'm middle-aged. Most of the collectors, at least who I see at cons, or I see, you know, who comment on my YouTube videos, are people who are my age or older, and I always say this whenever I'm talking to people now, and I've been saying it for the past couple of years, is if you're 45 and over and you're not really looking to hold a book for 20 years, why are we buying it at this point? You figure most people right now are going to retire around that 65 years of age. So do you think that most collectors being over that age or around that age are part of the reason why books are still being driven down, or do you think it has nothing to do with it? Because I do see some young people buying vintage, but a lot of young people that I see are buying exclusive and stuff like that. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. You know, I what was it that dropped recently? Like the Thunderbolts trailer and the Captain America trailer, and it was like, you know, who is that person that after all this time now, you know, here in our 40s is finally like, all right, now I need to go get Avengers 43, the first appearance of the Red Guardian. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I think most people have those types of books. So the question is, are there going to be new young people that want that stuff? And it's sort of hard to figure out if that's the case. Because like you said, I think that they're more interested in like some more like exclusive stuff or foil shiny things and all that stuff. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, because I think a lot of those people will mostly be brought into the hobby via those things. And then eventually, you know, if they get really into comic books and obsessed with it, those are going to be the people who like in the future go to bronze and silver and golden age and things like that. So like there's going to be very few people that, you know, are in their 20s that get into comic book collecting off the bat, you know, thinking like, oh, I'm a big fan of Archie and I'm just going to start collecting Archie. I'm sure that there's that collector there, but like, you know, it's just, it takes a little bit, you know, it takes a little bit to kind of like hold people's hands, you know, through the discovery process of it. So
that's such a good point. You have no idea. Like, I kind of thought of that, but you just brought it to light. So finish your thought and then not there, but that's a great point.
Well, you know, you know why I try to bring that up when I can, because I think that sometimes I'll see the comments, you know, because I'll cover like, oh, hey, whatever, this new Spawn thing, whatever, and I'll do a video about it, and I'll see the comments of like, people are throwing their money away buying this stuff. They should be buying whatever, Joe Palooka, you know, or Golden, you know, whatever it is. And so don't buy Joe Palooka, but they should be buying Golden Age. And it's like, the thing is buying any comic books, I think, is good for everybody, because eventually they're going to discover that Golden Age thing. You know, they're going to go through that learning process, and you got to get new people into the hobby in a way. But I forgot. I don't know. I couldn't put a bow on my last thought, but
I got you. But yeah, we were going to talk about exclusives and stuff like that, and how I was going to ask you, how do you think people coming into the market, that people buying exclusive instead of vintage is hurting the market? But what you just said is, you may be right, that new people are entering the market. They feel safe buying inexpensive books. And I hate to say it, but you know, exclusives, foil covers, most of them can be had for $20 or less. So they may feel safe, you know, eking into the market, saying, all right, let me pick this up. It may be a Batman one foil. Let me go see what the story is about. I never thought of that. So that is a great point. But with that said, again,
I was going to say, you know, what's interesting is like, so really quick, when I went to San Diego Comic-Con, I did a little video where I was talking about just kind of my thoughts of it. And you put into words better than what I was able to put into words in that video. And the sentiment I want to express was, I just think if you're a 20-year-old coming into comics right now, or let's even, whatever, a 16-year-old coming into comic books, it's just, you walk into the floor and it's just easier to like say, hey, I want to buy something. And you see a shiny new Spider-Man foil cover thing. And you're like, okay, cool. Like, let me start here, you know, at least because, hey, this is a new thing. The signage is new. The booth is whatever, a new variant comic maker, whatever, compared to if you go to like the vintage section, and shout out to all our vintage dealer friends, but you know, their booths aren't always the most approachable, nicest, new boxes. Hey kid, come on in. Let me show you around. Like, you know, there's not that sort of customer service that happens there. So it's just so intimidating to like go into a vintage aisle and be like, I have $20 to spend. I want a cool Spider-Man book. Like, what should I buy? Like, it's too hard to go in that way. And it's just so much easier to be like, hey, here's the menu of the shiny foils, and let me just spend my money here. And they're not going to make their way over to the vintage section until they really do the deep dive of like, okay, I bought the Spider-Man book. Okay, now I'm going to like go watch Comic Tom, or I watch, TikTok. Oh, what's Key Collector? I download this. Hey, start looking. Okay, ASM. And now I do, the deep dive into like learning the history of all these books. And then, they have to go through that process. And it's just hard to like, walk up to a vintage dealer booth,
Even your LCS. I remember when I got back into comics well before 2017, but like I would have anxiety going into a shop for the first time. Even I would say even at your, if you have an LCS and you've never gone in, or you haven't frequented it in a couple of years and you want to get back into something, it could be very nerve-wracking. So what you just said, 100%, if there are collectors out there right now where you're just kind of dipping your toe in the comic waters, maybe, variants are the thing for you. You want to catch up on a character that you may think you have something in common with, that you like the cover. That's how you get into this thing. And then, like you said, you go on and maybe you start doing a little digging, and you find the first appearance of a certain character here, a great storyline here. Oh, I love this cover, because covers are a big part of collecting comics. So you make a great point there, which I really never thought of, that those things could be getting some people into the hobby. So that's great.
Yeah.
The one thing I did want to mention, you mentioned Archie. So for all you people out there watching this, I used to read, Archie was my go-to read when I was on the toilet when I was like 11 to 13 years old. So there you go. So it was an easy read.
You're the one person that got into comics via Archie,
Yeah. So, but yeah, I wanted to see what Betty and Veronica had to do with Archie this week. But
that explains it.
Yeah. So what would you say to collectors out there who are nervous about dipping their toes in a bigger book? I don't know how long it took you to go after a bigger book. The market was a lot better, so people were a lot less fear, so it was a little bit easier. But for now, what would you say to a collector that, I want to buy a big book, but I'm kind of unsure with the market the way it is? Have any special words of advice?
I mean, definitely use patience. Make sure you do the research, like, on a pricing guide of some kind, like whichever one you get, make sure that you understand what the book has been selling for. And use patience and use all the tools. Like, you don't have to just buy like the first one you see on eBay. Like, follow Instagram pages, follow dealer pages, watch auctions, and just be willing to walk away if it's just, you identify, like, okay, the book's been selling for this, it's okay, this is my budget, and, make sure that you stay within those parameters. And and if it's something that you really want, at a certain point, like, go for it. Like, is it going to be less than it is today, like next year? I mean, maybe, like, if the trend continues that way, maybe it's going to be the case, but like, who really knows? And it's just sort of like, if it's something that you want and you've done the homework, like, at a certain point, you just have to rip the Band-Aid and pull the trigger on it. And so, that's kind of the
biggest book that you buy the first time is always the hardest one. So like Mickey said, get yourself some tools. I cannot tell you how GPA, when I found GPA, how much it helped me. And obviously he does a lot of videos regarding the market, regarding GPA, regarding all type of sales. I do as well. And the reason partially I do it is for helping. I do enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, but like, not everything is about price. I said before, like, I care about the history of comics, but yet if you don't have that yet, these pricing tools can really help you out. Listening to certain people can really help you out. You have no idea how many questions they get per week on Instagram or via email of people asking me my opinion on certain books, if I'd buy it, if something's a good price, about the grade of something. So there are collectors out there who are willing to help you. Sometimes if you have a good LCS, they'll be willing to help you. I, for one, have a fantastic LCS. They're always looking to help people, always looking to find books for people. So I'm lucky that not everybody has that. But if you do, utilize those tools. The one other thing I wanted to ask you was that with all the spec things that are out there. I'm talking about the Key Collector app. I'm talking about there's other websites that promote certain books every month. You know, I cover the Hot 10 breakdown every week, and it just seems like they're the same books over and over and over. Do you think these apps and these websites and all these spec related things, even the videos, there's YouTubers who do spec related content, do you think it's detrimental to the collector and the market, especially in the market we're in right now?
Let me start with the market stuff. So I would say, in short, no. In long, like, I think here's the reality. Like, as much as, you know, we've have our YouTube channels, we cover stuff like and we've done, you know, had some impact in, you know, some collectors' lives here and there. I think ultimately, like, the market is going to do what the market is going to do, whether or not, you know, Mighty or Swaggle, you know, highlight a book. Like, it's just not, we're just not that big. We're just not that influential. I'm sorry. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Not me. I think you may be, not me. I'm not big enough.
I am definitely not. I am definitely not. Like, you know, it's $1 billion secondary collecting market, and you know, like, as influential as we may possibly be, I think it's not going to really shape the market ultimately. That's my belief. I could be wrong on that. I don't know. But I think that, you know, the hot list and stuff, it's like a double-edged sword, because, you know, we had it when we were young and growing up. It was like Wizard magazine. I mean, your show where you cover, you know, the Hot 10 sales is another evolution of what Wizard was back then. And on the one hand, like I said, I really enjoy watching that type of content, because, like, it just lets me know, like, hey, here's kind of like the lifeblood of what's happening, and here's what's kind of selling and stuff. And it doesn't affect me in any way. Like, I think I'm just obviously past the point where it's like I'm going to FOMO on any sort of book that ends up on a hot list. I just use it as like a way to get a pulse check on, like, okay, here's what's going on, and here's what's sort of selling, or here's what's moving. And I think it can hurt some people if they think that if the hot list is like, oh, here's the books that you should be buying, and they're always going to, you know, these are the ones that are going to make you rich. If you go into that type of content with that mindset, then yeah, you're going to get burned, because, you know, it's flavor of the week sort of stuff. But eventually everybody sort of learns, and then you just kind of realize, like, oh, this is the thing that sort of keeps the news of the hobby alive in a lot of ways. But I don't know. What do you think about it? Because you obviously cover it, and I've seen you know, you have to ride the line of, like, you're presenting the information, but, like, every now and again you'll definitely chime in and be like, do not buy this. But, you know, how do you approach it, or what do you think for that type?
I enjoy making the video, because I've been doing it for a bunch of years, and I credit Tom, Comic Tom 101, for doing his, because he kind of got my creative juices flowing. And I'll give credit to Alan, Comic Collector Geek. He's the one who came up with the idea, but we couldn't kind of come up with the way that we wanted to do it. So I kind of wanted it to be fast paced the way I do it now, and just kind of give the info and then give my opinion. But I wish, I don't know how the Key Collector gets the information for the shelves. I know they get sales data, but I don't know how they compile it to say what's number 10 to what's number 1. You know, I have no idea. But what I've seen over the time doing it is the majority of the books are Copper Age. There's a few modern, and there's some bronze. And every now and then you get a sprinkling of silver if we have a big sale. And a point that you just said a little while ago about, you know, exclusives and variants, stuff like that, being inexpensive to a point where it kind of brings those collectors into the hobby. Well, it got me thinking when you said that, well, how about some of these copper books being sold are those collectors that don't really want to go nuts yet and buy your bigger book, and they're kind of, let me buy the smaller keys first and see how I feel, see if I can kind of stomach spending this type of money. Or, you know, you get that high when you get that, you start collecting and you get some of these books. So maybe they're dipping their toes in that water. The books themselves, like, a lot of them are a dime a dozen. Like, I cover Hulk 340. It seems like every day for a year. I love the book. It's one of my favorite books growing up as a kid, one of the best covers that had ever been done. But you could see them at any booth, at any show, whether you buy it in low grade or you buy it in super high grade, whether you buy it in raw copy, whether you buy it a graded copy, it doesn't matter. The book is the book. I don't want you to overspend on that book, because you can go out and get it anywhere. If you're telling me you're going to spend big money and overpay for an AF-15, a lot of people are going to come out to you and say, well, there's 4,000 copies on the census. the end of the day, it's still an AF-15. Great. Like, you're one of 4,000 people out of millions who love Spider-Man to own his first appearance. That's the way I look at things. So I don't want people to spend $1,000 on a high grade Iron Man 55 first appearance at Thanos when they could buy the same book around a 4050 for $400 to $500. Like, just own the book. That's what it's about. Don't overspend money, because that's when you get yourself in trouble. Some people will disagree with me on that fact. That's, oh, you got to buy the best grade of this, you got to buy the best grade of that. That's the only reason, you know, you're buying these books for investments. Well, you have to realize most collectors, in my opinion, aren't buying books for investment. And if they are, I got to be honest, you're going to fail. That's not the reason to buy comic books.
Yeah.
So
no, I think you're right. Oh, go ahead.
No, that was it.
No, I think you're right. Like, talking about the types of books that show up on that list. I mean, there's so many people that are like, and I don't mean this in like a disparaging way. They're more like casual collectors. Like, they still remember, you know, growing up reading Jim Lee X-Men 1, and they, you know, love Gambit, and they'll like, the one comic that they want on their shelf is like X-Men 266. And there's a lot of those types of people, you know, that whatever, like, they're not so concerned with getting, you know, the lowest price ever. Like, they're okay just being like, oh, what is this selling for? $600? Like, I don't care. Like, eBay, buy it now, got it. You know, and for them, it's not like a big deal. It's just, they just wanted it. So I think there's just like a lot of those types of people. And I don't know if I'm ready to give this kind of like full advice, but like sometimes you'll get the question of like, oh, hey, Lawrence, like what book do you recommend like I invest in, or what?
I get that a lot. I get that a lot.
I'm sure you do. Like, and I've gotten it before. And I, you know, obviously I don't know. Like, I'm not a prophet, right? So it's like, to me, a lot of my advice is always like, well, whatever one is being sold under market, buy that one so you have instant equity. Like, that's really the best way to ensure that you gain value on it. But at the same time, where I'm going with all that is, sometimes I think, I'm not going to go this far, but sometimes I do think like, you know, hey, buying like a Silver Age, like you said, an AF-15, or like, I don't know, Bronze Age Grail, like if you get a high grade Hulk 181 and stuff like that, like, is it safer to buy a Golden Age book? Like, probably 99.9% of the time. But at the same time, like if I got the Captain America 3, like you mentioned, one of the interesting things, and I wanted to do a video about this, was that book in the last 5 or 6 years has sold however many times. Let's say it's sold, I don't know, 40 times or something like that, right? Of that percentage, only like 3 of those 40 sales have been buy it nows. So where am I going with all that? All of the sales for that type of book are ones that were going to happen because they got listed on Heritage Auction and someone was going to buy it. Now compare a book like that. If I spent, mine wasn't 20 grand, but let's just say I spent 20 grand on a higher grade of that. Compare that to if I spend 20 grand on an AF-15. Maybe it's safer to park your money in that than the AF-15, but at the same time, if you ever need to sell that AF-15, I guarantee you'll be able to sell it if it's priced fairly on eBay the next day. So I think there's something to that aspect as well. When you're talking about like, oh, hey, what book should I invest in? It's like, sometimes like some of those maybe they're more common, but they're more popular. In a lot of ways might be better for a lot of casual people. And
I think that you hit on another point, because I know somebody's going to ask me that, well, we're going to talk about scarcity. I'd rather have scarcity than a book that I can basically find anywhere. And you can go on eBay and probably find 10 AF-15s. I'm not going to lie to you, but they're all overpriced. I'll tell you that. Yeah. But you're right. Captain America 3, you're not going to find many of those. So people will talk about scarcity, and they'll talk about books that can be found anywhere, even if they are big books like AF-15. And what would you say to those people? What would you say to them, like, in that instance?
Well, scarcity is good because no one's going to undercut you when you go to sell your book, you know, and that's the benefit. But, you know, it's all the equilibrium of supply and demand. So really, you know, that's all that kind of matters. Is like, yes, like the supply is really low, but what's the demand of it? So it's just 2 sides of the same coin on it.
So you mentioned something about what do I say to people when they ask me the question, what would I buy? And my first comment is always this, is like, do you have an attachment to any character? And I will say to them, if you do, that's what you should be buying. You should be buying that character's first appearance, because no matter what, you have an attachment, and that's going to be more beneficial to you. But if some people come back and say, I don't really have, an attachment to a character, I just want to buy something comic related and keep it for 20 years. Like I've had a bunch of people say, oh, I want to buy something for my children so they could have it down the road and I could leave them something. And I'll always come back to the same thing. Well, if your child or you don't have an attachment to a character, I would say, to me, if you can't, depending what your price range is, right? Obviously, if you have prices unlimited, you want to buy an Action 1, Tech 27, Superman 1, Batman 1, all great down the line. Maybe a Marvel Comics 1 if that's your, really crazy money. But most time I will gravitate to Amazing Fantasy 15 because 1, it is readily available. 2, we talked about earlier in the show tonight that we saw about 25 come up in the past month and a half on Instagram consignment pages, and every one of them sold, unless it's got like major damage to it, or there's writing all over the book, or there's something missing out of the book. But if it's complete, I will always recommend that, because I do think, to me, you will always get rid of it if you had to in a pinch. It is a very popular character, and I think there's long-term value, and I think a lot of kids will gravitate toward that character.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, in the most quick exchange that you could have with someone, I mean, that's probably the best advice that you could kind of give them, without getting into the weeds of like, oh, you should get Suspense 3. And it's like, what's that? Like, oh, well, let me explain, And so it's like, it becomes so difficult to unpack all the little intricacies. So I think A15 is probably the best place to start.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think this census has the effect on some of the books right now and what people are buying?
Well, it's interesting because we, last time we kind of we didn't do content together, but you commented on a video that I did where I was talking about rarity and census and all that. And we had a shout out to Collector Dad. We had all that kind of back and forth in that conversation. I think it's interesting because I've made mention of this a couple times where we had COVID, we had the explosion of comic books, and you can see the influx of how many books got graded at CGC in that time. Like their graph literally skyrockets, like the amount of volume that was going into their company, and just in terms of submissions. And I've always sort of speculated, like if you're that person who has that collection, it's been sitting in your basement or whatever, your attic, and you didn't have really an affinity to it, and whatever, you have an ASM 129, and you're like, oh, you bought it for $100, and oh, what is it worth? It's worth like $500. Like, okay, like, yeah, all right, I guess I could sell it or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, COVID happens, and now that book is worth $2,000, $3,000. Like, all of a sudden, that book that maybe you weren't quite ready to roll out of bed for, like, all of a sudden makes you go, oh, okay, let me send this in. Actually, there's some meat on this bone. I gotta get some value out of it. So I think that happened to a lot of people who were collecting and had comics and were searching for comics. And I think that we saw the census explode in kind of a way that, like, a lot of inventory got sent to CGC. And the question is, where are we going now? Like, is more inventory going into CGC? Well, from some of the recent topics and conversations, we're sort of seeing CGC has way less submissions, or their submissions have gone down. Now, is the question, are people still, do people still have tons of raw books out there that they're sitting on to sell or to send in? Has the supply run dry? Like, is there not as many, whatever it is, AF-15s to send in like there used to be? I don't really know. I mean, I'll say this, like, obviously there's always going to be books that are added to the census. So whatever the census numbers are, you have to always assume that the raw books at least double this number or triple this number. And there will always be more books added to the census. And so the ultimate question is, how will that affect, the prices, or will there be enough people that want to buy it? We're kind of feeling that point now where people would rather just buy the raw comic book. So people are less inclined to send it into CGC. So maybe the census is actually going to slow down a little bit, at least until it gets crazy again. But I don't know. What do you think about all this stuff?
I think you just hit it on. I think a lot of people were grading a lot of things, trying to get equity in some of the books that they're buying. And that's why I thought there was a big giant shift to people buying raw comics, because they were getting better deals on raw comics than sending the CGC on their own. And now all of a sudden they have instant equity. But what they didn't take into account, especially on Bronze Age and to an extent Silver Age and absolutely Copper Age, is that there's so many copies out there of these things that you're driving down price. The more these census numbers go up, they're driving down price, because people are saying, all right, well, I don't need to buy this Hulk 181. I could buy a different one that maybe presents a little bit better and I can get for a little bit cheaper, because there's so many out there. They can really take their time and go after some of this stuff. So I think for a lot of food for thought for all the collectors who consistently send to CGC, by you're driving up these census numbers, effectively what you're doing is kind of driving prices of books down with all the inventory that's going up.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because I get a lot of, flack from people who watch my channel, because they'll tease me because, when I started my channel, I didn't really have any graded comic books. It was not something that I ever really bought. And people just identified me as like a raw collector, like as if I didn't like graded comic books, which was not the case. I just didn't buy them because, to your point, at that time, it was just cheaper to buy the raw version. Like, why would I pay the premium for the graded comic book? And then the market changed to where, well, now people are charging, graded prices for raw comic books. So I might as well buy the graded one, because I want to know exactly what I'm getting. And so like my buying changed. And now we're kind of getting back into a place where, like now people don't want to pay the premium anymore if they can get the better raw deal. And so I think that's kind of why more people are buying more raw books now, and why people are not maybe as interested in buying the graded comic book, because why do you want to pay the premium? So we're kind of resetting back to that place, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of I don't want to say a lot of stupid collectors have left the hobby, because that's not how I want to say it, but I'm going to say it that way because you have a lot of smart collectors right now in this hobby. The dumb crowd has left. You know what I mean? Like they've either been driven out by buying comics at higher prices and taking a beating, and they said, F this, I'm getting out. Or maybe they've stayed in it and realized, you know what? I need to start being a better collector for myself, and I'm going to start looking for equity in comics. And I think we're getting that in the community, where people are being a lot more careful on what they buy, looking for better deals, buying better copies of books. So I think that's also, people are just taking their time.
Yeah. No, that's actually true. Actually, maybe I joked that I don't think that we have influence and stuff, and I don't, but maybe all of the social media space who has had these conversations, like maybe the collective hive mind of educated collectors has leveled up, over the last couple of years. So like everyone is, just more, prudent in how they go about everything, and more savvy in terms of, what they think is, a good buy versus not.
But this is why we do videos like this, right? Because this is a fun conversation. Like I've wanted to do something with you for a while. When I thought about this topic, I'm like, oh, who better to get than you to talk about this? I did know that me and you looked at the market through kind of the same way. So,
well, I was just going to throw it back to you, but maybe you were going to land the plane this way, which was just sort of going to be like, what's your sense and feeling and outlook, going, I mean, we're already at the end of 2024. We're going into 2025. Like, maybe, I don't know if it's too early for predictions into next year, but I'm curious to hear what you think comics is going to look like next year.
It's funny you say that, because my next question was going to be what's the end game, and that kind of leads into next year anyway. So I think it's, as I mentioned just now, like with the collector being more savvy, I think it's more of the same. The one thing that really worried me that we talked about in the beginning of this video was that how the influx of Golden Age all of a sudden has really started to take off. Like how I'm seeing a lot more Golden Age books being available for sale. That kind of scared me a little bit, saying, hey, why are these coming out? But the one thing I didn't mention today was that we're at that age now where like 60s comics, people who bought comics off the rack in the early 1960s, they're in their 60s now, retirement age. So you figure a lot of them, because those collections, if they did hold for the long term, are coming out. We just saw that big Heritage collection that's just came to market for all of the Golden Age DC books. You figure if they bought off the rack from the 30s on, we'll call it, 80 something years old, Are many collections left to be found? I don't know. That's something that worries me going forward, especially with golden age books, because now you think if those people dying off around that age, more of those things are going to be found. We had a freaking Tech 27 found at a garage sale, for God's sake. That's like every collector's dream, right?
I know.
As far as 2025, I just think we're kind of going to stay in the same spot. Which worries me is with the new president taking over, I think the stock market could react in a negative way to certain changes, just because I think it's time for a correction, like a bigger correction. So that could also cause a bigger damage to some certain comic books. But if that doesn't happen, I'm just seeing more of the same. People being very picky in what they buy. Hopefully they're buying some of the bigger first appearances, because that's where I think, like, if you have an attachment to a character, that's what you should be buying, working your way towards that, because there's no better feeling. I know everyone wants instant satisfaction and gratification, in this time frame now, but it's just the better you're going to feel is attaining the unattainable. You know what I mean? So I think we're chugging along. I think there are other issues going on, like CGC, all this stuff there. Obviously PSA next year, which those things have to shake out, and that could affect the market as well. But I think it's more of the same until we get some more answers. How about you?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I do think about, and this will be like a kind of a scary thought that I think about. What's crazy is literally every Wednesday, new comic books come out. So like more comics get flooded into the entire collecting hobby and market, and so there's only so much money that exists for people to spend. So like that money gets dissipated into like vintage, collecting, silver, new comic books, wherever, right? So, with each passing year comes more books that either the hobby grows and more people can absorb all this stuff, or the hobby shrinks and all this new inventory, no one's buying it, and there's just the entire floor has to go down. So I think that that's kind of an interesting thing of like, does the hobby grow? I mean, it has to grow because there's always new product coming in. And I know that vintage collecting is a little bit different than new comic books, but they kind of play they kind of affect each other in a little bit of a way. But that's one thought. But I think that being said, I think that next year is going to be more of a positive year, because I think that we had a lot of the movies and stuff. Like obviously we're coming off of the heels of like a lot of ones that universally weren't loved, but I think that hopefully, actually I'm not sold that Captain America 4 is going to be great, but maybe we'll be surprised. But I think that maybe that stuff will start to get better and people might get excited again, and people will be more willing to pull the trigger on that one comic that they've been waiting to stop falling in price. I think this year, like it's kind of amazing to me that it was still this year where we had like the Reholder Gate scandal that happened at the end of last year and stuff. So we had so much, craziness going on with CGC and stuff, and that I have to think that there's not going to be as much of that stuff next year. I mean, I could be wrong. It is CGC. So I think that, I think things are looking up, because they were looking so down. I mean, how much more down could it go? I guess it could go to zero. I don't know. So that's kind of my thought. Yeah. I'm being a little jokey on that, but I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic actually overall about comic books. I think that the content of the comics have been getting better, like the new stuff, if people are paying attention and reading that. And I think that there's more positive sentiment that I've felt recently than earlier in this last year, especially coming off of Reholder Gate.
Yeah, I know a lot of things happened this year. I mean, I felt like the years prior was just about price increases and stuff like that. And then this last year was so many things that happened that kind of could have thrown somebody out of the hobby, with the swap gate stuff, between the banana gate, between, everything you can mention under the moon happened this year regarding CGC and other stuff with CBCS. Forget about last year. We had the new label change from some CBCS I always thought it would make a difference. It made no difference whatsoever. So
it really did. Yeah. Which is too bad. It's a good label.
Yeah, it is. And the cases are great, but it is what it is. The last thing I wanted to mention to you is, what's the end game for collectors right now? Especially people buying in this market. What is their end game? I don't know if you have an end game. I know what my end game is, but if you want to share what yours is, that's up to you. But what do you think the end game is for collectors who are still buying vintage comics and keys right now, especially if you're over 45 or under 45?
Yeah, well, I can't speak to what I think that their end game is. I'll say for me, it's really just like, I guess, where you're kind of framing it is definitely like, how much money are you sort of willing to put into these books and stuff like
you
that.
said it without me saying it. Thank you.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, I kind of know what I feel comfortable spending. It's just, I know my own sort of budget and risk tolerance with a lot of this stuff. I think that I'll be doing the same thing that I've been doing the last 3 or 4 years for the next 3 or 4 years, which is to like, buy and sell and trade. And I have books that I want to have in my collection that I just want to touch and say, hey, at one point in my life, I owned it, and then I can sort of let it go. And it's really more of a hunt and stuff. I don't know about the people who say you want to buy whatever, the Superman one, and I'm going to put it away for 30 years and see where it goes. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Like you said, like you have the older collectors who maybe have the golden age stuff that are passing away. And a lot of times people talk about like, oh, the boomer generation, they have all maybe these collections that they're going to be, passing on to us, or people are not as interested in it. I don't know. Like, it is maybe a little bit of a concern, but at the same time, like, luckily it's not all going to hit the market at literally the same time. It's just going to sort of trickle in as it does. But we're 10 years away from Action Comics being 100 years old. And comics, a lot. If you talk, I don't know if you ever checked out Reserved Investment, Sean, and stuff. I shouted to him. I've had him on the channel. Yep. So he talks a lot about, pop culture collectibles and stuff. And I think comic books is an interesting one because on the one hand, most pop culture things, Beanie Babies and trains and Hess trucks and the likes, eventually move off. Like the audience goes away. But comic books has been persistent enough to where we're getting to the point where when Superman hits 100 years old, it officially becomes, how does he frame it? Like an official antique, And so it's interesting to think about that. Like maybe comic books will be the one thing that bucks the trend of pop culture collectibles. Could be wrong on this, but they've been pretty, good so far. And it's been it's an American cultural invention, which I think says something. So I think that there will always be some appreciation for certain items like AF-15s and Action 1s and stuff. And even though we're all going to be, like living in the metaverse one day with our like robots and stuff, like I still think that there are going to be people that want to have AF-15s. That's my guess. But I don't know. I didn't really answer your question because I don't know. But that's kind of where I think of it. I'll say that I think for the next 10 years, we're still good. I think that we will be in retirement homes still flipping books to each other 20 years.
Hopefully we're all in the same retirement home. A few of us, at least, we could talk about it and reminisce on the good old days. But for me, the good thing
about the greater fool theory is you only need one fool. So there's going to be that one last person in the retirement home that's going to hold all our bags.
Yeah. So the one thing I'll say about the end game, and of course, Doctor Strange said it in Infinity War, we're in the end game now. And I'll say that to all the collectors. Hopefully you stuck with us throughout this entire video and hopefully you took something out of it, is that, if you've been in the market for the past 4 years and you were in it during COVID and then you're still in it now, I think it's because you love comics. So don't forget that aspect of it. Yes, there is a community. People like to say there isn't. There 100% is. This is falling off. But make sure that your end game is what you want it to be. Don't overindulge. Know what you can spend. Don't let it consume your life. That's the reason why I kind of like downsized a lot, because it became to a point where like, you're drowning a little bit, and I didn't want to go into my elder years having to kind of sell everything at once, because I do think that's a tricky slope to get down. But there's a reason you got into this. That was my point of being it. It's leading into 2025. Know what you want to keep in your collection. Don't flood the market at once with all your books. And, you know, this is still supposed to be fun.